Hi, it's Nero here from Investment Rise, and what I'm about to say, well, it's going to annoy some of you. It really is. It's going to right royally tick you off. But for some of you, it's going to excite you, and for some of you still, it's going to motivate you to take action. Now, I don't know which camp you're going to end up in at the end of this, but my promise to you is that if you stay with me until the end, you're going to end up in one of those three camps. Okay, so consider yourself fair warned. Still with me? Okay, so let's get started. Look, it's no secret right now that we are in the midst of a significant property boom, especially in the house market. What I mean by that is that as a generalization across the country, there are many areas where house prices are rising significantly, where apartments on the whole, yes, there are some exceptions, but on the whole, apartments are struggling. But the rate at which house prices are rising makes this not your garden variety standard kind of boom. No, this is one for the ages. I mean, in February we had the fastest rate of price growth in decades. And then in March we had the fastest rate of price growth since 1988. And then sure, in April we had a brief slowdown in the rate of price growth. But if prices only were to continue to rise at the same rate they did in April, which, as I said, was slower than February and slower than March, but if they keep continuing to rise at just that slower rate over the next 12 months, that would mean that house prices on average would rise 21.6%. Now, that means that a house priced right now at $1 million, and if it rose by 21.6%, it'd be worth over $1.2 million in 12 months, or over $200,000 in capital growth. Okay, take a house that's $500,000. At 21.6% annual growth, that'd be over $100,000 in capital growth. And that $500,000 property would be worth over $600,000. Right? These are amazing, amazing figures. And although I don't expect prices to keep rising at these extraordinary rates, there is no doubt in my mind that property prices are still set to rise much, much more than they already have. All right? So with all of these prices rising across the country, the question then has to be asked, well, is there going to be any kind of external intervention that could slow down this property boom or bring it to a grinding halt? Now, why do I ask that? Well, because if you go back through history and if we look at the last few property booms, they've all been ended by some form of either monetary or fiscal policy intervention. And what I mean by that is when monetary policy, it's because the RBA has done something, often they've increased our interest rates, or the government via APRA, which essentially rules the banks, well, they've done something to essentially bring a halt to the property boom. I mean, consider the last boom, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, which was between sort of 2012 to mid 2017 in Sydney. How did that property boom end? Well, essentially, the government intervened, and firstly, they made it much harder for foreign investors to buy property in Australia, which I think is a good thing. And secondly, they then went and made it even harder for domestic investors, for local investors in Australia to buy investment property. All right, and as a result of those regulations, which really made it harder for people to buy property, invest in property, it made it harder for them to borrow as much. What happened? Well, Sydney and Melbourne had their biggest downturn in property prices between, mid 2017 in Sydney and late 2017 in Melbourne, all the way until about mid 2019. That was the biggest decrease in property prices we've had, bigger than the last recession, certainly bigger than what happened in COVID, and certainly bigger than what happened in the GFC. All right, so the government intervention had the bigger impact. But then let's go back and look at the mining boom and the property boom that rose and rode on the back of that. Okay, especially in areas of Western Australia and some regional areas as well. What happened? Well, in 2012, the Julia Gillard government decided to introduce the mining tax, and almost immediately property prices started to slow down and the boom ended, and now we know that property prices have fallen dramatically in many mining areas. Okay, but then go back even further to the property boom that happened as a result of the Sydney Olympic Games. How did that end? Well, that was the state government, the New South Wales state government, decided to introduce a 2.5% vendor tax. It curtailed the property boom. It just brought it to a grinding halt almost immediately, right? I mean, this was back in 2004, and I had just started my property investing journey. I'd been in the market for a couple of years, and I remember speaking to a local real estate agent, and she said the previous weekend, before this new law was introduced, the market was hot, phones were ringing, everything else. But the day after this law came into force, the phones went dead quiet. I was sitting in an office, and if you've ever been in a real estate agent's office, you know it's a busy office when the phones are ringing and everything else. But I was in this office, and you could have heard a pin drop. It was nothing, right? It had literally, this new law had, boom, stopped the property boom from continuing onwards. Okay, so it's happened multiple times. So the question then is, well, what's about to happen right now? Because we know property prices are rising, as I said, the fastest that they have in years in many areas, especially in the house market. Okay, but the good news for property investors who are looking to get into the market and are wondering if they've missed the property boom. The good news for people who already have property is that the Reserve Bank of Australia has come out and essentially said, house prices rising, yeah, we're not concerned at all. I mean, check this statement out from the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. Jobs our focus, not soaring house prices, RBA. The Reserve Bank has conceded record low interest rates are contributing to soaring house prices, but warned governments and regulators it's their problem to solve as the central bank focuses on driving down unemployment. RBA Deputy Governor Guy Debelle on Thursday night used a speech to the University of Western Australia to argue that while high house prices created problems, a lift in interest rates would hurt the job markets even more. In other words, the RBA is saying that they are not concerned about house prices rising and have zero plan to increase interest rates. Later in the article, we see this. Dr. Debelle said rising house prices were evidence of the way low rates were working through the economy. They encouraged home building that helped boost activity and employment. He said while there were legitimate equity concerns about house prices, ultimately those issues were outside the purview of the RBA. So it's reasonably clear, right? The RBA has zero interest in what the house market is doing. Their focus is on jobs. Their focus is on keeping rates as low as possible. But remember what I said, there are two ways that you can have policy intervention, two ways to bring the property boom to an end. Number one, as I said, is the RBA and interest rates. Well, we know that's not going to happen. The second is the government, primarily APRA, which is what the tool that was used to bring those lending regulations into force and really tighten the market in mid-2017. But consider this from APRA Chairman Wayne Byers, who confirmed that APRA won't be doing anything anytime soon either. Risk for the financial system occurs when lending standards are poor or weak, Mr. Byers told a committee for the Economic Development of Australia event. We don't see that up to now. Banks have done a pretty good job in holding lending standards up. The APRA chief also said that regulatory settings were broadly right, given that the agency's mandate was broader than stability of the financial system at all costs. So what does that all mean? It means that the RBA and APRA and the government are all totally happy with house prices rising. The key message is leave the property boom alone. Let property prices rise. It's good for jobs. It's good for the economy. And so it's no wonder that even the most conservative of pricing models released by the RBA shows that the RBA expects property prices to rise by 25% over 3 years, starting from the beginning of this year. All right, so after all this, what's the key takeaway message here? Prices are set to rise much more. And if you're a property investor, the sooner you get in, it certainly seems like the more capital growth you are likely to make. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you found this video valuable and you're thinking you might like my help to help you find an investment property, then head on over to nerocall.com to discover our unique 5-step process that's helped my private client group purchase now well over $66.2 million worth of property. And then if you like what you see, you can book in for a half-hour phone consult with me personally. Either way, thanks again for watching.